Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock News and Politics Hour, and we have got a full one for you. 3 o'clock was The Taste with Rick Simone with Alfresco Dining. Want to thank him and all the guests for coming into the studio. Want to thank GoLocal regular Bob Wickham. Bob, thanks for coming in today.
How are you?
Got to kick off. It has been Supreme Court Palooza.
Sure has, yeah. The union decision, interesting. This have interesting macroeconomic effects. I have to confess, I've always been very suspicious and skeptical, basically against public employee unions because it's a natural conflict of interest with the politicians. Having said all that, this is going to weaken the union movement even more than it has been with the decline of private sector unions. What we used to call trade unions. And I think the effect will be to lower wages and reduce benefits for other people too. This is going to lower the floor even more than it already has. So I think the long-term effect on the general economy may be quite negative because of the further loss of purchasing power by low and middle income people.
Well, we saw Rhode Islanders speak out on the issue today. You can read that on GoLocal after about some leaders speaking out. Because, of course, on the more conservative side, they're taking the victory lap. Trump's taking the victory lap.
Well, I saw that, and I think there's something, and I've always been I've been kind of tormented by this because I think in principle I'm very suspicious of public employee unions because, as I just said, the politicians then can use them or have to address their needs, sometimes over the public interest. And I think it's been a particular problem in education. Having said all that, you've got the macroeconomic effect, in the general economy, and I think in a troubling. I've got some troubles with that. Again, I think it's going to tend to, by further reducing the power of low and middle income people to bargain for higher wages and better benefits. I think the inflation-adjusted effect on wages would be to lower them even more. Not that they've surged in the last 30 years, and to weaken the what's the right word? The influence of working class people.
Well, we'll see what happens.
It's a tough case.
Moving forward on the labor front, of course, this comes on the heels of the Supreme Court upholding the Trump travel ban.
Right, that didn't surprise me. That was what the third iteration.
I think it was third iteration. 3.0 as it's been dubbed.
I did notice within a couple of things. I'm much more worried about an angry young white male, probably who has attended Trump rallies. Who loves guns, blowing me away and killing a lot of people than a terrorist from a Muslim country. I think I think this is a kind of misplaced concern. Also, I noticed that of the and I'm not alone in this, that of the Muslim countries were listed, there were, I think, was it Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey were excluded from the list.
I think they call that a carve-out.
Yeah, there's a carve-out for countries in which the president has business interest, while the countries from which terrorists have actually come, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and I think, what was the other one? Yeah, including the UAE, yeah, were excluded. They're okay because they do business with Trump and his associates. So it was a very peculiar kind of ruling, but I think the Supremes didn't necessarily say they agreed with that ruling. What they said they agreed was that the president had the right to do it.
Exactly.
Which isn't quite the same thing. Chief Justice Roberts made that very clear in a somewhat in a very interesting side commentary. But again, I think this is mostly a misplaced fear. If you look at who's apt to get shot or killed or otherwise attacked by terrorists in the United States, the overwhelming threat is from young white male native-born Americans.
Well, of course, these two decisions are probably even dwarfed today, but not an unexpected move, but coming today on the heels of so much action from the Supreme Court Justice Kennedy,
who was sort of, they call him a swing vote. He's conservative, but sometimes he'd surprise people. He was basically a Republican conservative, but gay rights, he was quite a proponent of gay rights. He's retiring. As you and I discussed before going on the air, this was pretty much expected.
It was expected.
I'm assuming that Mitch McConnell will railroad through the Senate the candidate, Trump's candidate,
Well,
Trump's nominee, as quickly as it can.
We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens because there's clearly concern amongst Democrats. There's concerns amongst the pro-choice community.
Right.
We did see Aaron Ruggenberg make a statement this afternoon. He wants the General Assembly to be reconvened to talk about the particular state legislation for a woman's right to choose. Jennifer Lawless, down at American University, basically said that there goes a woman's right to choose. There's an overwhelming sense that this could potentially, obviously, tip the balance.
I think it probably will. I think there'll be interesting political effect. I think all that's bad news, at least temporary bad news for the left, if you want to call the Democrats left of center, and the progressives a little further left, is it will maybe agitate them enough to get them to vote. As you know, in 2016, voter turnout fell, and these people who didn't go to the polls are now complaining about what happened. Voter turnout amongst the Democrats fell because nobody was particularly excited about Hillary. They either didn't like her, or they weren't energized by her. You know, a lot of the Bernie people waited it out.
Well, we did just see what happened in New York yesterday with a big progressive win there. But let's talk, I mean, between Kennedy retiring, the potential for RBG to be gone in short notice as well. I mean, let's talk about the people that the president can potentially put on the court. And if they're young, if they're in their 40s or 50s, he's not just changing the composition of the court, he's changing the composition of the country for a long time.
Yeah, as conservatives, William Howard Taft, people like that did in the early part of the 20th century, these very, in some cases, you really call them reactionary justices, like some of the people that stopped some of the New Deal. They're going to have this for a long, long time. I think it's going to cause a lot of outrage on the other side, but again, the Democrats deserve it because not enough of them bother to vote. The Tea Party crowd and the cultists, the 35% of the population who are fanatical about Trump, they all vote. You know, they vote for their leader. And the other side tends to be much more languid.
Well, do you think, I mean, let's see what happened in New York yesterday, between Governor Raimondo, Matt Brown, between Dan McKee and Aaron Ruggenberg, do you think this is an indicator of what could potentially come in the primaries here in the state?
Well, I don't think quite. My guess is that's still a little exaggerated. I still think kind of the old-fashioned Truman Democrats will succeed. I think the big question is, as we've said time and time, what happens to the general economy? If the economy goes way south, then I think it's likely to start doing that next year, maybe in 2020. Nobody ever knows. The timing of booms and busts is almost always wrong. But we know we're in a credit bubble. The country is operating under a sugar high from these tax cuts. And so when the
tax cut, sugar high.
Sugar high, that's what it is.
Bob Wickham coined it here.
Borrowing levels are astronomical. The household debt is through the roof. Corporate debt. They're even borrowing money to buy back stock. To you know why? To boost the price of the stock for the people in the C-suite. And then they'll be out. They'll take their money and run. So when all that implodes, I don't know when it'll implode. I think probably by 2020.
But as you always say, it's the economy stupid when it comes to voting.
And then you'll have a real progressive thing. You know, if the unemployment rate goes up 10, 15%, then the lefties will have their day.
We'll see what happens. Let's talk a little bit about what GoLocal unveiled this week. As folks have been following the collapse of the St. Joseph Pension Fund was one issue within the diocese. But GoLocal obtained documents that show the troubling nature of the lay pensions and the school teachers who could potentially be affected. Does the Catholic Church, does the diocese have an issue on its hands?
I think they really do. There are a lot of people, one of whom is you know who, my wife.
But full disclosure,
Not that there's a vast quantity of money there, but but she gets a little monthly payment for being an art teacher at various Catholic schools, and that could all go away, I guess. Even though, again, what she's getting paid is very minor, but I guess even that could go.
Well, keeping an eye on that and all things within the diocese and the pensions. And you've got your cheat sheet here of things you want to talk about.
Obviously we talked about the Supreme, so the most important thing, she says, probably Justice Kennedy's retirement. The union thing didn't surprise me. The Pawsox thing is fascinating because it's a mystery. We don't really know what the deal is. Maybe you've heard. Is the governor signing this thing?
Well, the last I'd heard from her when I had spoken with her on live was that she was supportive of it. But the real million-dollar question is this what the Pawsox want?
That's right. And also people get all mixed up. The Pawsox don't own the stadium. They have a company, the Pawtucket Red Sox, which is affiliated with the Boston Red Sox. So it's, we get these things all tangled up. We don't know what the deal from Worcester is going to be yet. We know that Charlie Baker has expressed in a rather vague way a willingness to provide some infrastructure support. which means transportation, I assume, exits and, entryways, things like that. We have no real idea of what their proposal is in Worcester.
Well, we're waiting to see what's next. We do know that it passed at the Assembly. Anything else that you want to?
Let me see. Yeah, it's sort of a crazy thing. It may interest me and two other people. I noticed in my neighborhood there's this beautiful modernist building. It was put up in the 1950s by a famous local architect called Ira Rakotansky, who studied at Harvard under famous architects like Walter Gropius and stuff. And I'm walking by that thing, and I thought, this kind of made me nostalgic. It's kind of beautiful. It's kind of light and airy, and it kind of displays a certain confidence, a certain cultural confidence that the buildings, the modernist and postmodernist, or the postmodernist buildings we see now lack.
So you're waxing nostalgic for
of all things,
the modernist era.
I never thought I would, but now it's looking good.
But what about the brutalist?
The brutalist, I'll never fall in love with that.
Boston City Hall is not going to be behind your list. No.
Absolutely. Oh, one other thing. Do we want a fascinating business story, sort of healthcare story, with Partners wants to basically self-insure all of its employees. Partners, the gigantic healthcare company up in Boston. They're already in the insurance business. They now want to dump Blue Cross Blue Shield in Massachusetts and have their neighborhood health plan provide all that stuff, which presents all kinds of interesting quandaries, because the main aim is to cut costs, and yet, of course, a lot of these people insured by neighborhood health plan would be going to Partners. Massachusetts General, Women and Brigham and Williams, whatever it's called.
It seems a little bit of a power play. A big power play, if you will. But we've seen this before. Remember when we talked about the attempts privatization, Berkshire Hathaway, and the
well,
groups.
That's kind of the same thing. They're all going after cost. I don't know how the cost thing works with this.
Because they are it.
Well, I suppose they might be trying to get rid of some of the middlemen, like the brokers, insurance brokers, maybe save some money that way, because Partners has famously high cost, famously high prices by the hospitals, the physicians associated with them. So how does this save money?
Well, we got to keep a close eye on this because of the potential implications here in Rhode Island.
That's right.
Bob, I appreciate your taking the time, as always, to come into the studio.
Take 2 obituaries and call me in the morning.
2 obits, call them in the morning. Bob Whitcomb, appreciate it. We'll talk with you soon. Bob Whitcomb, as he does most every week, comes in and breaks down local news and politics. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock news and politics show. We've got some politics for you. Pat Fonts, I want to welcome you into the studio.
Thank you very much,
You've
Kate.
been on the media trail because you are running in the Democratic primary to face United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Talk with us about your decision to throw your hat in the ring.
Okay, the decision to throw the hat in the ring happened in this way. I've been living in Europe for a long, long time, up until 2004. And when I came back, I found a state that wasn't what I left when I left in 1973. you know, the Democratic Party had moved somewhere toward the center, or even right of center, to the extent that I practically didn't recognize the party as my own. And when I came back, having lived in Europe, I was also very aware of the difference between the European view of America and the American view of America. People who ask me, how can you go back to that place, Pat? You know, how can we know you, and how can you go back to that place? So I got involved almost immediately in the anti-war movement, because it was still just after the Iraq War had started when I came back. And I joined a group called South County Justice and Peace Action Group, and then I got involved with a group called Rhode Island Mobilization Committee Against Wars and Occupation. And little by little it got to the point where I finally ended up in about 4 peace groups. And the common and constant complaint in those peace groups is that we talk to each other. It's very hard to find somebody else to talk to. We run events, and we go to each other's events, and we give speeches, and we go to each other's
And there must have been a moment where someone said, maybe you should run, Pat.
Well, exactly. What the moment was this. I went to a Democratic Town Council town hall for Sheldon Whitehouse in Westley. I live in Hopkinton, Rhode Island. So I saw that he was going to be speaking at the Calabrese Club one Saturday morning, got myself into my car and drove down and found a little group of maybe 40, 50, 60 people, and Senator Whitehouse addressing them. And I got a chance to actually ask a question, because it wasn't that hectic to get into the question game. And I asked him 2 questions about issues that were really, really troubling me. One was me and all the people in my groups. One of them was the question of why he had voted to approve this budget of $716 billion, which included a military increase of $70 billion that no one could figure out who had even asked for. The Pentagon had not asked for it.
Okay.
And yet somebody put this money in. And the other question was, what was hot at the time, near the end of April, was the question of a proposal that Rand Paul had made to, Rand Paul had made to temporarily call a little bit of a halt on the authorization for the use of military force.
The war powers that he with Bernie Sanders.
Exactly, and to stop and look at it. I don't think the vote would have annulled the authorization. It was to stop and look at it, give some look, especially in the light of the Yemen problem. So I asked him questions.
Had he made his vote at this point?
Right.
Okay,
because there were only 10 Democrats who voted, and our 2 Rhode Island senators are among the 10.
That allowed the president to still have those war powers that were allowed right after 9/11.
Absolutely. So I went up, from the floor, I asked a question about each of those issues. He gave me an answer that didn't satisfy me. In the first case, the necessity of compromise. We had to compromise with the Republicans, or they would have hurt domestic spending. And the other question was time. There was a time to study the issue well enough, and now we can see what's saying there wasn't time. There wasn't time in April, and now we're bombing the only city that you can bring food in to all these people who have no other food. They have to import 90% of their food. And
so you were not happy with his answers?
I was not happy at all with his answers. And so I waited to speak to him at the end. I thought I'd appeal to him at a personal level, because way back in 2006 or sometime like that, must have been just after he was elected, I had gone to his office and supported him in a decision he made with regard to a case that at the time was notorious, the Acorn case. Remember Acorn? And so I had started out with a very positive feelings toward him. And I explained that to him, and I said, what has happened to you? Why have you moved so far toward warfare?
Did you say that? Did you say what has happened to you?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay.
More or less. I said, or at least I said something like, I can't understand what has happened to your positions. And he was pleasant with me. We were walking out, and then, unfortunately, the poor guy, this is the 5th or 6th time I've told the story, but he unfortunately said to me, well, I guess I had said something like, I don't want to vote for you. After all that favor, I don't want to vote for you. And he said something like, well, then who would you vote for? And I said to him, well, I won't vote for anyone if I have to vote for you. And that put it in my mind, you see. I went home, and not about myself. I just thought, this is not right. This is not fair. We shouldn't have, we should have options. We should have alternatives. And by coincidence, within 3 or 4 days after that, I got approached by 2 different groups of people and asked would I run. And given that my head was where it was, and given that these people are dear friends with whom we've spoken about, one of the primary motivations was to get attention to the anti-war position, because we don't get in the newspapers, we don't get pardon me, but I don't know whether you've ever had anyone on to speak about the anti-war positions. So we felt, look, even if this sounds like a totally crazy thing, even though it may be an absurdity, that may be the very thing that gets the media's attention.
Well, here you are talking about the issues.
Exactly.
And one of the issues you mentioned too is also environmental issues. And the senator has been very publicly non-committal on the power plant, as one way to put it. I believe there was an instance of a hearing up in Barville where he instead was in Little Compton talking about his opposition to climate change. So a lot of folks have questioned if that's the case, if he is so opposed to climate change, why he won't take a definitive position on the proposed Invenergy power plant in Barville. And so that's another piece of your platform as well.
That's another piece of the platform. The Barville plant and the LNG plant here in Providence, you see. I mean, what someone called him to me the other day, not in their backyard. So you defend their backyard, the rest of the world or the rest of the country, but you won't defend our own backyard. And it's another moniker that he's getting attached to now is like Mr. Bridge Fuel, You still, maybe 2 years ago, you conceivably could still have thought that natural gas was a bridge fuel. But it's now 2018, and we now know what the methane pollution is, what the methane cost of extracting the fracked gas is, and yet he still refers to natural gas as a bridge fuel. I call him the bridge fuel. What bridge? The bridge from not yet. Bridge from not yet to too late. Too late. And that's the bridge we're going to be on. It's never time to make the changes. Yes, it's going to hurt. So did abolishing slavery. Abolishing slavery hurt somebody's economy, no doubt about it, but it had to be done. And I think the same thing has to be done with changing from fossil fuels. It's going to hurt, but no one wants to bear the pain. Then it will be too late.
Too late, Mr. Bridge Fuel, too late. So let's talk a little bit. You talk about raising the issues and going around. Are you in it to win it? Do you think that you can get the progressive support behind you?
I'll tell you, I won't say no. I'm not going to start out saying, this is only being done to, it's only being done to direct attention. You never know.
You never know.
Look what happened to the woman this morning.
And look in New York.
This is
the big progressive victory in New York.
The big inspiration for me. If that young woman could throw out a guy who's spoken of as the next Speaker of the House of Representatives, who knows? Who
knows? Pat Fonts could do it.
It could happen.
And you've got a campaign apparatus around you. You expect to be out there on the streets. So should we be expecting more positions and statements from you moving forward?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we've my declaration of candidacy listed some of the affairs in which I've been most active. But there are other affairs about which I need to educate myself more, because if I'm going to be consistent with my position that the true knowledge comes from really dealing with the facts on the ground, really, conversing with the people impacted by the problems, then I have to go and talk to other groups that I haven't been active in, but where people can educate me.
You're going to be out there on the campaign trail, and having just kicked off, Pat, I appreciate your taking the time to come in, introduce yourself to voters. I'm sure we'll hear from you moving forward, but again, challenging a candidate, an elected official you had once supported but have now changed your mind. So Pat Fonts, I appreciate your taking the time to come in, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. Thank you so much. We'll talk with you soon.
And thank you very much
thank you so much.
Me.
We'll let you go around the corner, and we'll be right back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock News and Politics Hour. It's been a full one so far. Bob Whitcomb talking about recent Supreme Court developments. Pat Fonts running as a Democrat against incumbent United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. And a guest we've had before, Rachel Flum with the Economic Progress Institute. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
General Assembly session wrapped up, I'd say, on the waning days on Saturday, and you're here to give us the breakdown as to how you saw the session. I don't want to say give it a letter grade, but give it a letter grade. Solid B?
So I would say, yeah, if we could break it out by budget and other, I would give the budget about a B+, and the rest of it might be a little bit lower than that.
Okay, so let's start with the budget, because the Economic Progress Institute, from your vantage point, is really breaking down the things that you were advocating for and what we've seen. So the B+ in the budget, let's talk about the restoration of, the governor had proposed co-pays for Medicare, and basically that was taken off the table, which is a huge win for the Economic Progress Institute.
Right, absolutely. So for Medicaid, she had recommended, which some states do, that there would be co-payments for visiting a doctor, going to the emergency room, and even though they were small dollar amounts for the folks who were going to be having to pay them, it could make a real impact on their budget. So we were very pleased that the General Assembly did not keep that in the final budget.
And what else about the budget gives it the B+? What were the good things? What were the things that still didn't see in the budget you would have liked to have seen?
So this year, the budget really made some structural changes in public benefit programs that we think are really important in ensuring that children and families and all Rhode Islanders are able to meet their economic needs. So largely around child care assistance. For a long time, we've been talking about the needs of both the providers to be able to meet their own basic needs. They're severely underpaid. The system had really gotten to the point where it was broken because the providers were not being paid adequately to provide the service for lower income kids. And as a result, they were starting to not take lower income children, especially infants and toddlers. And so the General Assembly implemented a tiered rate structure for based on quality.
Okay.
So the higher quality programs will see an increased reimbursement rate, both to incentivize quality and also to ensure that the providers who are already providing higher quality care can continue to provide those good supports.
So child care, the Medicaid co-pays being taken off the table. What else in the budget?
So a good investment in DCYF. We know they had been underfunded last year, and we were seeing direct impacts to children. So good investment in DCYF. The voluntary extension of care, so allowing 18-year-olds who many of us who know 18-year-olds or were 18-year-olds know that they're not quite ready to leave the nest with no support around them. So ensuring that they can stay and have some support services until they reach 21 is very important. So we were also pleased about that.
So B+, what did not make it an A budget?
So, we would say that we still need to do more around affordable housing. There are no general revenue dollars that go to affordable housing in this budget. And so we think the state really needs to have a serious conversation about how to address that and to make sure that there is some state investments in that. On the revenue side, the car tax is continuing to be phased out, and we do have concerns about the ongoing costs for that. And there were no revenue increases included in that to help to pay for that ongoing cost for the car tax. So we still have concerns about how to pay for that going forward.
So that's on the budget side. You sounded a little less overall pleased about the session. Let's talk about the issues that you had with other legislation now that they're out.
Sure. So we were also pleased. The budget did do some investing in home care workers and other largely women who provide care services for either folks with individual or developmental delays. Also, a bill that was passed at the end of session created a new network for independent providers for home care, and so we think that's a really important investment as we see our state continue to age, our silver wave, and we want people to be able to stay in their homes, and so this will be an important first step for that. We were pleased with the DACA driver's license bill that was passed. As our nation continues to grapple with this issue, we were pleased that Rhode Island took a leadership role in ensuring that our DACA students who are here can continue to drive. And so those are some of the good things. There's a small investment in ELL, so the English Language Services, although we think that there's a lot more to do around that in making sure kids graduate from high school and aren't thrown into an adult education system because they have not gotten the education they need in the K through 12.
Okay, so looking for some more ELL funding. Let's talk about other things, equal pay, other measures that you might have some outstanding concerns with.
Yes, we were very concerned with the equal pay and the process by which that bill ended at the end of the session. We were part of the coalition who supported the strong introduced bill at the beginning of the session, and then the Senate version. We were disheartened by what the House ended up passing out, and we hope that that's something they can take up again next year and have some real, common sense protections for both women and for people of color who we know are often less likely to have those protections.
Speaking of protections and speaking of women, just before you came on today, Rachel, Aaron Ruggenberg, who of course is running for lieutenant governor but still is a facto state rep, called for an emergency session of the General Assembly now with the soon-to-be retirement of Supreme Court Justice Kennedy, and looking at the state's role in a woman's right to choose. Is this something that Economic Progress Institute would take a position on? Again, this just came out this afternoon from Aaron Ruggenberg.
So no, we traditionally have not taken a position on that. I mean, it is known that reproductive rights is an economic justice issue for women. If you don't have access to that and you can't make your own choices, women often find themselves struggling more mightily. So we would be concerned, but we probably will not take an official position.
It is political season. We are going to be approaching primaries shortly in the general election in November. Talk with us about what's on your plate moving forward now that it's assembly aside, looking at candidates running for office.
So we are nonpartisan, so we don't engage in the politics that's going to happen going forward. We do hope that candidates will consider both the revenue side of the issues as well as investments for the state and all Rhode Islanders going forward. That when we look at workforce development and workforce investment, that those are included in the budget, and economic development, we are always concerned about making sure there's adequate reporting for tax credits that are going out the door.
Well, we're going to be keeping an eye going towards November here, and of course, you're going to keep an eye on who's elected, but moving into the next General Assembly session, I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis, but it sounds like you're putting together what didn't get accomplished here this session with an eye to 2019.
Absolutely. We didn't get an increase in the minimum wage other than the bump from last year. We also need to do some further protections around paid family leave because, again, as our community continues to age, we need to be sure there are supports for the caregivers in the society. So we'll continue to make sure everybody knows about that happening. And so we think that that's really a great step for workers, that they won't have to choose between going to work and taking care of themselves or a family member.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking the time to come in because usually it's advocating for legislation up there. Right now, we're looking at 2019, but sort of the good and the bad of the 2018 legislative session, according to the Economic Progress Institute's Rachel Flum. I appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll let you go around the corner. We'll be right back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for news and politics. There is a lot going on today. And I'd like to welcome now in Patricia Morgan, House Minority Leader, Republican gubernatorial candidate. Thank you for coming in.
More than happy to come.
With some very serious concerns about the GOP party apparatus here in the state, made it very clear early on you would not be seeking the party's nomination.
Yes.
But now you've gone through the nominating committee and are raising questions about just who is on it as it pertains to the relationships with former gubernatorial candidate Alan Fung.
Yeah, the nominating committee actually they met on Saturday. Normally, the members of the nominating committee are secret. Don't know why, but they're secret, so that nobody knows who's involved. But I obtained a list of the names, and it is so clear that the whole process has been tainted. It's like old Democrat backroom party boss politics, and it's invaded the Republican Party, which is sad to me. I believe in the Republican Party very much. I believe our principles will help Rhode Island be stronger. But when the party bosses can completely rig an endorsement, it's not good for the party. Corruption under any party title is not good.
So you have the list of those folks on the nominating committee. You've highlighted some who you know
Yes.
are very public supporters of Mayor Alan Fung, and now employees of the city of Cranston.
Yeah, there are 2 employees of the mayor who are on the nominating committee. That is so in your face, a conflict of interest. You know, our chairman went after Gina Raimondo when she had made an agreement with the Providence Democrat Committee, because that chairman was one of her employees. And he said, this is wrong. This is a conflict of interest. It shouldn't be allowed. And yet, Mayor Fung put his chief of staff and his director of economic development on the nominating committee.
Was it Mayor Fung's role or was it Brandon Bell's role as to who was on the nominating committee?
Is there a difference?
So you are calling it out, and you're making the comparison to the old school Democratic politics, as you said.
This is party bosses. Seriously, the chief of staff, that's Carlos Lopez, and I've never seen him more than 3 feet away from the mayor. Seriously, his job, his family's future is dependent on the mayor. And they put him on the nominating committee, and then they just went one up and put the director of economic development
this is
on
Lawrence
there too.
DeBoning.
Same thing. It's a conflict of interest. It shouldn't be happening. Then there are a host of others on there who actually appear with the mayor everywhere he goes. They take his pictures, they post them, they handle his social media, they're liking him all day long. Seriously, there are hundreds. The RIGOP has about 300 members. They are grassroots members who would be fairer, who would try to stay away from those conflict of interest. That wasn't done here. The mayor purposely rigged the nominating committee and the entire convention.
So, pretty serious here today, as you're
here's
stepping away from the convention and you're having a barbecue tonight.
So I said last week that I was not going to go to the convention. They immediately convened their rules committee and rewrote the rules so that I couldn't be nominated from the floor. So that's never been done before, by the way. I was chairman. By the way, I was chairman, and when we appointed the nominating committee and the rules committee and credentials, they were nominated at the beginning of my tenure, not 2 or 3 weeks before they were needed.
Well, that was my next question. Because of your previous role in the party apparatus, you've provided the contrast from what you said. I think you made an analogy. What year were you in? You said it would be like you appointing...
I was there from 2002 to 2006. And seriously, as soon as within three months of my being elected, we established all the committees. That way, when you get to the election, the committees are already in place. You're not gerrymandering them, you're not rigging them. Is jerry rigging a word?
It could just be.
But that keeps it more honest. This is not an honest and fair process, and it really pains me to say that, because the Republican Party is the party of change. We are the party that needs to show that we can be honest and fair with the people of Rhode Island, that we are the ones who are going to fix what ails Rhode Island. And if we're acting, with party boss mentality, that's not good.
Well, I'm glad you came in here today, because I know you've got some hot dogs and hamburgers to enjoy with
We
supporters.
do.
Where's it taking place?
Down at my headquarters, which is 1170 Bald Hill Road. So Rhode Island Mall, you go a half a mile south from Rhode Island Mall on Route 2, and my campaign headquarters is there. Everybody is welcome.
Okay, if you like the position that Patricia Morgan put forth and her questions
and
about
this
the party.
is it, if I can just interrupt you a minute. I don't think the endorsement, quite frankly, is that important. I'm going to take my message to the people of Rhode Island, to the grassroots Republicans out there. I have a strong message. I have a message about the things, the common sense things that I think will fix Rhode Island and make it a better place for everybody. So that's where I'm taking my message.
Okay.
And I hope you come to my cookout.
Before we let you go, I have to ask you the question, because we are going to Mike Stenhouse shortly here to talk about the Supreme Court's decision about public sector unions saying that you can't force someone to pay dues if they're a non-member. Now, you've got a perspective on this.
I do. I was a special education teacher at Cranston West for 10 years, and it always bothered me that I was paying dues to an organization who never, ever supported a Republican. They never did. So all of the money that I was giving them, and it's a considerable amount of money times oh gosh, I should know how many teachers there are, and it's missing my brain right now. But that's a lot of money that they collect, and they're using it for Democrats. Well, I'm a Republican, and it always bothered me. So listen, this isn't a death knell to unions, whatever they're going to say. But this allows people they actually have to opt in and say, I want this union to represent me. I think that's good for all of us. It gives the people who work there choices.
What do you have to say? We've seen a lot of blowback from the Democratic side saying this is an affront to the middle class.
Listen, the Supreme Court has ruled that it's not constitutional to require people to give money to an organization that they don't want to give it to. It's about worker freedom. So everybody who wants to be in the union, they can still be in the union. They can still be represented by the union, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. I think that's fair to the workers too.
Well, again, we're going to talk with Mike Stenhouse at the Center for Freedom and Prosperity shortly, but wanted to have you in again as the process goes through the RIGOP about your concerns. So I appreciate your taking the time to go in. I know you're going to get back down to work. Patricia Morgan, thanks so much.
Thank you, Kate.
Don't go anywhere. I'll be back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome in my final guest to the studio here, Mike Stenhouse with the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Kate. Great to be with you.
It's good to be with you. I know you've been busy today following the Supreme Court ruling about public sector unions and how if people want to opt out, they can do so and not have to pay dues to the unions. Now, you've been talking with national groups about this today. What's the conversation been?
Yeah, actually, I want to correct that a little bit. In an unexpected portion of the ruling today, the Supreme Court said that non-union members, people who right now are just paying agency fees as non-members, don't even have to opt out. They are considered, as of today, as opted out. So they're not going to even have to go through any process to check a box or go through some process in order. So we're calling on all state and local governments to immediately stop withholding union fees from their paychecks.
Okay, so an interesting facet of that. Now, this is something that initially you've been paying attention to for a while too. What do you have to say to those, especially from the Democratic leadership, who decried today's ruling?
Well, listen, the truth of it is the unions have been huge funders of Democrat candidates. That's fine, but what's not fine is that taxpayer dollars and employees' compensation against their will is being used for political purposes in political campaigns that we don't agree with. Listen, people can still join unions. They can decide whether to or not, but no longer can taxpayer dollars, or more importantly, teacher, police, fire compensation be siphoned off and used for political campaigns that go against your wishes. So this was a call for freedom. This was a defense of the Constitution. I mean, our First Amendment rights, free speech, free association, were decisively upheld, and rightfully so, by the Supreme Court today. I don't think anybody who can disagree with the notion that my money shouldn't be spent, I want it to be spent as a public employee. That's what happened.
And so what were the conversations that you had at the national level? Was it about that, as you said, that particular portion of the legislation that doesn't require folks to opt out? They currently, as you said, are, so you're calling on the state to take action. Was that the biggest piece of it, or were there others?
Well, that was a surprise. The biggest thing we talked about is what we as local organizations can do to raise awareness. I don't know what our Rhode Island unions will do. We do know that unions across the country, in other cases where states have voted to go right to work, which is a parallel to this, but this is essentially right to work for public employees, that unions have tried to obfuscate and even hide their employees what their real rights are. Today, granted new rights. Will the unions stand in the way of workers exercising those rights? Will they make it difficult for them to exercise those rights? Will even acknowledge to them publicly that you have new rights? Or will they try everything they can to preserve their cash cow flow and try to hold on to these members and dues-paying non-members for as long as they can so they can keep money flowing into the campaign account? That's the question.
So do you foresee that as being a big issue for the center moving forward? Again, as you said, working together with national groups for the education piece of it.
Well, we have a decision to make whether or not our center wants to get involved with some kind of public employee outreach and educational campaign so we can do the best we can to advise employees of their rights. And then we trust that they'll make the right decision, whether to join a union or not. But now they know that if they don't join a union, they don't have to pay dues or fees of any kind right now. So in Michigan, for instance, after they went right to work, public employee membership dropped by about 25%, but not right away because, like I said, in Michigan, the unions tried to hide this fact, tried to make it as difficult as possible for members to opt out. So it's a big campaign. I don't know that we have enough size and capacity to undertake that here in Rhode Island. We're only a small think tank and with a few employees, so whether or not we can effectively reach the thousands and thousands of public employees in this state, I don't know.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time. I know if you want to see Mike's statement is on GoLocal, so I'm sure we'll continue to follow this issue closely, but of course you had weighed in on today, so I appreciate your taking the time to Skype in, Mike.
Always my pleasure. Thank you, Kate.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We'll let you go. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. It's been a very busy day here at GoLocal Newswise and in the studio. We were over in the Alex and Ani Lounge at 2 o'clock with Mike Baker. Want to thank him for coming in to play. 3 o'clock was The Taste with Rick Simone talking about alfresco dining in Rhode Island now that we are into the summer season. 4 o'clock News and Politics was a busy one. Kicked off with Bob Whitcomb, GoLocal columnist, talking about the recent developments in the Supreme Court, both with rulings and the court's composition. Talk with Pat Fonts, running in the Democratic primary against United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, explained how she had once supported the senator back when he first ran and how her position has since changed and how she was urged to toss her hat in the ring. Rachel Flum with the Economic Progress Institute here talking about a breakdown of the 2018 General Assembly session, what they saw as the highs and the lows and what they'll be looking to fight for in 2019. Patricia Morgan, Republican gubernatorial candidate, got a hold of the list of the nominating committee for the Rhode Island GOP and questioned a number of folks' ties to Cranston Mayor Alan Fung, including 2 city employees. She's calling the process rigged. She said last week that she was not going to be taking part in the nomination process, but since has gotten more information about it and brought it to light here today at GoLocal. Finally, also had Mike Stenhouse with the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity talking about the Supreme Court's ruling today with public sector unions. So plenty of news and politics to be had. Tomorrow we welcome back Rachel Nunes at the 3 o'clock hour with some lifestyle. So we look forward to seeing you back here in studio. But of course, continue to check in with GoLocalProv.com and GoLocal on Facebook for the latest with news, politics, lifestyle, and sports. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.